My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
I enjoyed my chat with you, Charles, last week so much about creativity, and I know you enjoyed it too. I want to continue that theme. There was a beautiful comment actually in the UK column forums about the importance of chatting about creativity because it's a fairly large topic, and I think it's something. Besides the fact that it's uplifting, it's also part of the essence of being human. It's right at the foundation of who we are, and it gets lost in all the noise. And when we talk about creativity, it's not just about, music or entertainment or arts or anything. It's hobbies. It's also finding boredom, because in that boredom we become creative, and it's that cycle that gets completely suppressed in what do you call it? In society where they like distraction culture, where they just constantly keep you distracted with everything, scrolling, and the more they keep you on your device and constantly wired, the less creative you can be. And the World Economic Forum itself has actually said that it wants people to be constantly wired. I mean, that's ultimately part of a transhumanist agenda. So I want to just chat more about the importance of creativity. And I mean, an example, Mike, is you working with watches.
It's playing music, it's drawing, it's whatever way that any of us can find to do something, create something that didn't exist before. And I think some of the most interesting acts of resistance that I've seen over the last 20 years have been as a result of doing something absolutely creative, and that becomes an extremely positive experience. I mean, just to take one really silly example, it wasn't silly. It's not silly in the sense of in the sense that it didn't have an outcome, because it absolutely did have an outcome. But just the whenever we were at the column, whenever we were attacked by the Authority for Television ban back in 2014, the way we went about dealing with that was quite creative. It was also quite entertaining for people, and it absolutely motivated people to contact that organization, and that organization didn't exist for very much longer. So this is. I think the key thing is to do something other than what is expected in many ways.
I mean, I know, Charles, you enjoyed that chat very, very much.
Yeah, I did, hugely. And I think there's been a really good response to it. I think it must be said that whilst the response has been, I would say, uniformly positive, it is just, I don't think we can regard it as coincidental that by viewing statistics, it scores lower than if we'd been talking about something that was fundamentally a negative subject. And I do think that is something that we do need to address, or at least make reference to the fact. Well, of course, we've talked about it a lot before, whether you describe it as doom scrolling or whatever. The fact is that whichever side of the fence people perceive themselves to be on, they are more drawn to what looks like a bad news story than they are to one that might be characterised as a good news story. And I think the direction of our discussion last week was absolutely very positive. And I think all the things that we see around us that are sort of containing or restricting creativity are in themselves acting as drivers for creativity, as a reaction against it. And I think a lot of people absolutely recognise that. So I feel it was really enjoyable. It was nice to have the chance to talk about something different, but also something that I think is positive. And exactly like Mike says, it's totally intertwined with resistance. I can't remember whether I did articulate that last week or not. I think I did. And if I didn't, then what I'd meant to say was to use creativity as that particular quality that I'd expected to see from Brits in particular in the face of, well, actually it was firstly the apparent decision to leave the European Union and therefore the opportunities that present themselves, or it doesn't matter what it is, you know, whether society is going to be shut down for a pretend illness, let's say, or people are going to be told that they have to do this in order to continue their life. So yeah, I think the creativity in the wider sense. In fact, no, I definitely did talk about that. Yeah, that is very important. I should just take this opportunity before it slips my mind to qualify some of what I was saying last week, because there was a very good comment made in the thread on the UK Column members forum about the remarks I'd made. I mean, it's an open goal. It's an easy one to criticise. I spoke about Tracy Emin's bed, which sort of hit the headlines and was a big show made about it. But fundamentally, for many people, it changed the way in which they thought they were supposed to think about art. And the point made, not exactly as a counter to that, but as a qualification, was that the other tragedy about art like that is that it is also stripping away the idea that people would have some sort of a grounding in the particular culture it is that they're observing and critiquing. In other words, it's a great shame that we don't live in society anymore where people can look at art and they do actually understand, when I'm talking about genuine art here, and they do understand what such and such a motif or a trick or a reference actually is. And that again is a part of it, that the general and enormous dumbing down of everything and everyone means now, presumably as an artist, you're limited in terms of what you can even express, because who on earth is going to understand it? So I'm not talking about sophisticating beyond a level which might be considered reasonable. But if you go back, because again, the point I made was about, say, a lot of Renaissance art was designed to A, tell a story, but B, you could say in some senses it's propaganda, because obviously where was it being funded? But the point is that there was absolute confidence in the fact that the message was going to be received because people would understand the various references that were being made in the art. Now, I don't think that's the case anymore, and that was something that we didn't talk about last week. So in stripping away people's education, I mean, you could say the same across the board. Literature would be the same, but people are not even able to understand the references that are put right under their noses. That's again an indictment.
So here's the comment that I was referring to by Pepe. Thank you for starting this discussion. I hope UK Column will focus on art and culture as an ongoing regular feature. We are told that politics is downstream from culture, so it couldn't be more important. E. Michael Jones on my show last week said that everything's downstream from culture, and he's right. I mean, if you think about it, right? If you travel to another country, one of the first things you want to do is see how beautiful it is in its own way. You want to look at the architecture. You want to go to the museums. You don't want to find out about its political history when you're there. You want to find that attachment to the novel, the new, the interesting, what makes it unique, what makes it its own thing. And of course, with uniformity, like we see, in many sort of Russian cities or even Chinese cities, you see a lot of the same thing. And I find that very, very depressing. And I honestly prefer, European architecture. I find it absolutely beautiful. And it does something to you. It makes you feel like there's meaning and purpose again.
Yeah, but I think when we go to these places, if we go to a museum or we go to somewhere that has massive cultural heritage, we're going there as consumers. And while there's something to be found in that which may be inspirational, it helps us get to make connections with our roots or whatever it happens to be, it's still an act of consumption. And of course, what has happened in the smartphone era is that we have become consumers exclusively. There's a few people that are producing stuff. Most of it's dross, but we are generally consumers. And of course, if we're consuming something which is high culture or is cultural, whether it's music or art or architecture, we should be using that as inspiration. And then we should be developing our own creative skills to do something with that. And, you know, that we all have different capabilities. And for the majority of us, and I absolutely include myself in this with respect to music, for example, the majority of what we might produce is not going to be the highest standard, let's say, but nonetheless, it is probably going to be the best that we can do. But there's something that we gain from that act of producing something. And yes, we take inspiration from others, but we shouldn't just be consumers. That's part of the problem that we have at the moment. And actually, the truth is that productive act, that creative act, is in and of itself an act of resistance. And so we should be doing much more of that.
But how do you break away from the consumer drive?
You know, when I was growing up, Charles might be old enough to remember this, but probably not. But when I was growing up, there was an artist on the BBC called Tony Hart, and his programs were great for kids. They were really about trying to encourage kids to draw and to paint and produce art. But before his individual programs were on, there was something else on called Vision on the BBC, and I can't remember the strapline specifically, but it was something along the lines of switch off your television and go and do something less boring instead. And this is basically what we've got to relearn, is just to throw the smartphone in the corner, smash it off a wall, do something, just to do something to take that away from you, that influence, and we gotta. It doesn't matter what it is. Take up knitting. It doesn't matter. Do something that ends up with something that's a thing in front of us at the end of the day, whether that's a musical recording or a picture or a cardigan. I mean, who cares? It doesn't matter, so long as it's something that has come from ourselves. That becomes a productive act, and is, as I say, an act of resistance. I
mean, Klaus Schwab himself said in his book, The Great Reset, or the fourth, I forget what it's called now, about the fourth industrial revolution. He said that he would love to render human labor obsolete. And if you render human labor obsolete, you're also rendering creative labor obsolete, which means that you're creating zombies, and zombies are not creative.
It's interesting. There's a conversation going on amongst the AI crowd at the moment about the fact that AI is destroying labor jobs, and what are people going to do? And so this whole issue of universal basic income becomes a hot topic again. And I have to admit, I am somewhat conflicted on the whole UBI thing, because on one hand, I'm thinking, well, yeah, okay, in the current situation, what's going to happen? UBI is going to be a thing, and people are, we've said this before, the whole lockdown thing was a kind of a pilot for this, where people were being given free money, and lots of people used that to just sit in front of a television screen and watch Netflix, and Netflix and others did very, very well during that period. But there is potentially an opportunity there if people don't have to, consider how am I going to earn a basic living. That some people would then use that opportunity to produce something truly beautiful, and so while I recognize that UBI is without question a sort of panopticon CBDC digital ID related policy, and in principle, as it's being expressed at the moment, it's something that should be opposed. I can see how if it was done in the right way with the right motivations, it could be something which would be liberating for people. Let's put it that way. I realize that the intention is not to do that in this case, but as if we're talking principles, it might be something worth considering.
But I wonder, though,
I'm going to get accused now of being, pro the agenda.
Well, if you're going to get accused of being pro the agenda, let's also just quickly drop in how great China is, for no reason whatsoever.
Is that a creative act there?
But UK column itself is actually an example of creativity. It's a response in many ways to the propaganda, the mainstream established narratives. And it is a result of people wanting to find the truth, sieve through the nonsense. And creativity takes on many, many forms, but it is ultimately about passion and drive. And those are the things that are constantly under attack. When you become a useless eater, then you lose the ability to even think critically.
Shall I step in?
Yes.
Right, good. Okay, yes, absolutely. I think that is most certainly the case. And especially when you trace it back, in fact, as if anyone needs reminding, UK column is 20 years old this year, 2026. And when Brian started up on his own, it was with a physical piece of paper. Of course, 20 years later, we are going back into physical pieces of paper with the excellent quarterly column magazine, which if you haven't got a copy of, please do. Plug ended. But that was creative because not only was he producing something physical, but he was also doing so in such a way as to activate the minds of the people that were or should have been concerned by what it was he was writing. And this was going back to Devonport in Plymouth at that point, where he really was exposing corruption that did affect all those people. And so the way in which he went about that and what evolved, which of course is the bit that Mike can talk about, was absolutely creative. And I think it has completely remained creative. And part of the creativity, which I think is still lost on some people, is that we, in many respects, we look like, or can look like, where the news is concerned, we can look like a news programme that could be on a mainstream channel. And this has been the point throughout. Brian's point, Mike's point, is that is absolutely deliberate. But if people really do listen and really do watch, they see that something very different is being done. And that's why I think it's been, I would say, almost amusing to see people so confounded by not being able to work out whether UK column is supposedly on the left or on the right. And of course, the answer is neither, because the way in which we're dealing with absolutely everything is, I would say, creative. I have to be a bit careful using creative in that sense. I don't mean that we're making stuff up, but the appreciation of the analysis of the commentary on whatever it is that's out there, I think is absolutely creative, as is the way in which we are able to look at something and certainly not take it at face value, but absolutely be able to point to not just where it's come from and what it really means, but also where it is intended to go to. And these are the bits that other news organisations will never do, for a whole host of reasons which we don't necessarily need to cover now. But that absolutely is creativity. Now, just to go back to a couple of things, I've just been jotting down a few notes. Talking about what creativity actually is, what it means, and sort of how it's challenged. I know we've made this point before. Mike's already referred to AI, but I think the massive danger of AI, we did talk about this a little bit last week, is that what it convinces people is that they are creating something, because you can put stuff into the machine and it will create something. And in fact, what is happening is that it's simply the creation of an illusion of the human doing something, and that is not the case. And it demonstrates the enormous danger of believing the sorts of things that come out of machines. And the other very obvious example I would give of that is modelling, computer modelling. The fact that during the year 2020 and for probably 2 or 3 years afterwards, people actually believed what they saw on these government dashboards. That number of people are supposedly in that category, which means that from a figure, which how on earth has that even been come by in the first place? We are extrapolating X, Y, and Z, and there were so many hurdles leapt in one jump in order that people do just simply believe it. And I think that is the sort of other and very much nefarious end or use of something that is a creation of sorts, but it's certainly not a human creation. The human has intent, and that is then magnified, multiplied, whatever you say, by the modelling or by the artificial intelligence. So I think that's an illusion. The next bit I was going to say, and to those who are either listening or watching, I hope you're sitting down, because I am old enough to remember Tony Hart and the program that I think you were talking about. I knew it as Why Don't You when you say Vision On. I think it was called Why Don't You.
Yes. No, you're absolutely correct. I got that completely wrong. Yes. Okay.
And
well done.
But yeah, thank you. But wasn't it in fact broadcast from Northern Ireland? Is that right, or am I confusing it? I don't remember it very well, but anyway.
No, I think the series had different. I think they went around the country on that.
Okay, but yes. Anyway, actually, I always thought it was slightly paradoxical because, of course, I think the part of the line was, "Why don't you switch off your television set and go and do something else?" And I thought it's kind of odd line for a television program, but I suppose they should have meant at the end of the program. But yes, Tony Hart. There's more to say on Tony Hart, because not only did he absolutely stimulate and celebrate all the sorts of areas of creativity that particularly young people should be interested in, and he was unbelievably interesting, engaging, amusing, and brilliant. But, if anybody knows better, then please do correct me, but as I understand it, the BBC destroyed the entire archive of his work on the grounds that they didn't have enough space. So this was in the day when everything was recorded to, don't know whether it's accurately described as videotape, but basically when it took up physical space, and they supposedly got to a point where, oh, well, we can't store any more stuff, so we're going to have to start destroying things. And all of Tony Hart's work, because there were several, I can't remember the names of them, but I know, anyway, there were several series of his that had run on television for absolute years, and rather than finding a way to either put them onto a different medium that didn't take up so much space, or simply renting more space because you're the BBC, they destroyed them. Now, I would stand corrected if somebody knows better, but that is my understanding of the situation. Now, that in itself tells an extraordinary story, I would say. And then the only other thing was just to make the distinction in terms of acts of resistance between, say, painting or sculpting something and knitting a jumper. And I'm not saying that one isn't connected with the other, but in actual fact, what the state has an enormous problem with is people who can subsist or create things that mean they don't have to go out and consume. Because and I'm sorry to say this to artists, because I'm not saying that that we should survive without them. But of course, the fact of it is that you can survive without sculptures or paintings on your wall, whereas when it gets cold, you do need warmer clothing in most cases. And to be able to have those sorts of practical skills to do that, it doesn't matter what it is, whether you're doing that, whether you're fixing your own, plumbing or heating or building something. But those types of skills in particular have just absolutely dropped off a cliff, and that is, I think, a serious problem. There's all this chat about sort of whole of society approach to impending war and, shocks to the system. And it's all, the language used is so glib, as though, oh, well, it's not really going to happen. And it's sort of about food, but we've kind of got it in hand. When you look at what people are or are not able to do below a certain age, I think it is absolutely shocking. And that is, well, I mean, there's no answer to that at the moment. I think the Labour government put out some very, very flimsy piece the other day on apprenticeships. But, so what? The point is that you need to put in front of people the idea that creating is not only enjoyable, but also practical and totally normal. And I think that's been completely lost, exactly like you say, the Klaus Schwab line of effectively wanting to render humans utterly, utterly useless.
I'm just looking now at Tony Hart's work, and I do vaguely remember his name and his artwork, although I don't think we had any of his shows here, because that was at a time when we were still being sanctioned by most of the world during the apartheid era. So I think I might have seen some of it in the mid-90s. And it really is beautiful. And I'm looking at it now, and I get so nostalgic, because everything that you see now is CGI. I mean, Cartoon Network is just all computer generated stuff, and it just feels so empty. I won't let my kids watch Cartoon Network, because there's just nothing there of any kind of value. If they were ever to watch cartoons, it would be, the stuff that goes back to the era of real hand-drawn creative stuff. I mean, I grew up with those cartoons, from the 1960s and 1970s. But I mean, here's something interesting about you. You were talking earlier about what was pushing back. I don't know if you know the musician Rodriguez. He did that song Sugar Man. All right,
nope.
Doesn't really matter. An American singer who died, I think, just 2 or 3 years ago, actually. He was unbelievably famous in South Africa during the apartheid era, and he had no idea, his entire life, he had no idea how famous he was here. And in fact, he wasn't famous at all in the United States. He carried on working his factory job while being completely bulldozed by his record label. So he didn't really get many record sales. It's a very, very interesting story. There's a wonderful documentary about him called, I think it's called Sugar Man.
It's called Searching for Sugar Man. Yeah, exactly. I know. I haven't seen it, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
Now, what happened was, while he was doing his factory job and singing in bars, his music became a type of resistance to the apartheid regime here in South Africa for years, and he had no idea. And his music wasn't allowed to be sold here, so it was being distributed, underground throughout the country. When he was eventually informed how massive he was here, this was now just a few years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe a few more years than that, he was brought over to come and perform here, and he got out of the airplane to a red carpet and masses of people. He had absolutely no idea. I mean, that's an incredible multi-layered story, but it is also a story of when you are continually making things and you're being creative, like people were in terms of distributing his music as a kind of resistance to the oppressive regime that we had. You can't keep people down.
No, but that's a great example of someone just being creative for creativity's sake. So he was clearly had no idea what impact he was having on people, but that wasn't his motivation for doing it. Part of the problem that we have to resolve is that, the likes of Britain's Got Talent or the X Factor has convinced people that there's no point being creative unless you are, it's become a journey of narcissism. Unless you are famous and a massive influencer or selling 1 million records a week, you have no purpose in life, and so you might as well just give it up. And the message very strongly and with the X Factor was was yeah, you're rubbish, so go away, sort of thing. Not interested in you. You might as well quit. You know, we shouldn't actually care too much about whether we are, you know, objectively good or not. We should just be happy with what we're, you know, we should do. I mean, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do the best that we can possibly do, but if we can only ever reach a certain level of skill with a musical instrument, for example, or with a paintbrush, that shouldn't stop us trying, and it shouldn't stop us getting enjoyment from doing that, and it shouldn't stop us learning from the exercise either. The problem is that so much of creativity has become something which is, you know, a mechanism towards some kind of narcissistic fame, and that's something we should reject absolutely.
Well, I mean, Mike, I failed art school. I mean, I don't know how you fail art school, but I failed art school, and I still went on to do art because I love it so much. And it's not exactly a great career choice. I wouldn't, you know, recommend people try and become a cartoonist, for example, but it is nonetheless, you know, something that I absolutely love. And so I defied my lecturers and said, well, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm still going to, I mean, the fact that you have to go to art school to do art also is kind of weird anyway. If you actually think about it, like, why must you go and get a degree in art in order to become an artist? It doesn't make any sense.
It depends, doesn't it? I mean, I can see if there's a element of learning practically how to use, you know, what effect you can create, say, using a particular medium, and you would not otherwise, or it would take you years and years to work out that by trial and error. I can see there's a practical purpose in it, but certainly to be taught, sort of conditioned, as it were, in terms of concepts, I find that, yeah, I would totally agree. That is absolutely extraordinary, and I know it absolutely happens. I mean, I funnily enough, I had a conversation with the parent of a teenage girl relatively recently, who was in a similar predicament. The girl, this was a at, I think, what's called A level, which is the sort of the last set of exams that you would do before leaving secondary school in the UK. And the girl in question was doing art A level and was basically being told by her teachers that such and such a thing that she was producing, and there's nothing to do with whether it was necessarily perceived to be good or bad, you know, whether she had talent or not. It was just, well, you're not going to get any marks for that, because that's not, you know, that's not dealing with the sorts of things that that we believe the examiners are going to want to see. Absolutely amazing. So just straight away, you just, you know, toss the creativity in the air and just jump up and down and stamp on it. I mean, it's so peculiar, and also puts not just the child, but puts the parent in a very difficult position. You know, having a child in school where that's the response to your progeny's desire and creativity. I mean, what do you do? Do you say, okay, well, just crack on and do what you're doing and accept that you're on a course and therefore you're going to get a grade, and that grade is going to tell not just you, but anyone that you pass the grade on to, that you're absolute rubbish, when that has, frankly, nothing to do with it. I mean, it is really difficult. So, I mean, it's a very, very odd situation to find oneself in. But then again, it is also completely fascinating, and this is something that I think, from a British perspective, Jake Fern is very interesting on, because his experiences in art school, where he effectively he describes his sort of peer group as having entered into a Marxist cult, or at least that's where they were being pushed as a body of art students. And, you know, if you didn't go along with this, that, and the other, you were in effect told the same thing, which is, well, you're not going to make it. And that just tells you so many things about the governing influences, and indeed the well, you might say, if you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, the narrow-mindedness of the people that are teaching that stuff and actually putting that forward. I mean, in many ways, it's pathetic, but it's also deeply sinister.
Well, I mean, again, you can't stop people from being creative. The punk movement, particularly in your country, the UK, has had a phenomenal impact on music, on the history of music. And it was a response to a rather boring society at the time, in the early 1970s. The established order. I know that punk also started in the US, but it started on a different footing. But I mean, it's undeniable how creative the entire punk history was. I mean, it went beyond music. Blues also, as a response to oppression of black people in the US, which led then to rock and roll.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's creativity. That's my point. It's creativity.
On the face of it, I have to admit I'm insufficiently qualified to remark on either of those two things, except for the fact that, as far as I can tell, punk, the sort of the ethos was completely subverted, and certainly in the UK, punk became synonymous, not musically, but sort of culturally. Punk became synonymous with somebody who was an irreverent, callous idiot. And I don't think that was really anything to do with how it was supposed to start, sort of from a musical point of view. So it just goes to show that if there was anything that was sort of, genuine and inspired in the first instance that hadn't been created and crafted with some nefarious purpose in mind, then it was quickly seized upon in order that it was effectively denigrated in front of the people that were supposed to be appreciating it, so that its message was lost. But what the story is with, well, I say what the story is. What if there is a sort of an alternative backstory to blues music? Then I don't know what it is. So again, somebody please write in.
It's related to black oppression in the US, effectively.
Yeah, well, exactly. But the question that has to be asked with any of these things, any of these movements, is was that, I sort of hesitate to use the word, but was that organic?
Yeah, I know.
Or did it actually come from somewhere else? I just don't know.
Combination, depending on the scenario and the time and where it was, etc., etc.
Yeah,
I think the problem with all these things is once they become commercialized, then they become corrupted in many ways from their original intent, and that's sort of why it is important for individuals, ordinary people, to be expressing themselves, ourselves, in some way, because that the external influence is probably not there. At least it's certainly not there to the same degree.
But I mean, sorry, Mike, for jumping in. I'm just thinking now, if we're talking about music as a type of creative resistance, if we think about the hippie era, right? And sure, there was a lot of subversion going on. I think we know that. But at least there were a large number of people trying to make their voice heard, that they did not like the US getting involved in foreign wars.
But you see, the problem there is, Jerm, there was an organization called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was absolutely a CIA front,
yes,
which was driving a lot of that. And so, and I mean, it even had Bertrand Russell as its chairman or president, or I can't remember exactly what his role was. But the point is that was a CIA operation to turn society, to turn a certain section of society in a particular direction, and to try to influence the direction of society as a whole. So you can't, unfortunately, we can't look back at particularly big so-called cultural influences of the sort of mid to late 20th century and have any confidence that any of them were actually, at least in the way that they ultimately were expressed, that any of that was in any way organic.
Bob Geldof himself was a bad actor.
Well, you're going to have to edit this bit out because when I demonstrate this level of senility, it does get embarrassing. Bono is who I'm thinking of here. Well, he is absolutely occupying his time in amongst the top levels of globalist society. So there are a number of people within the music industry that are, without question, doing something other than they may wish people to believe they're doing.
But I think the point ultimately is that, as I said right at the beginning, creativity is part of who we are, and we have to be so aware that there are all these attempts to try and suppress it, everything to keep us distracted in the attention economy. And ultimately, if you are perpetually wired and thinking about everything that's going on around you, you're never actually going to think critically about things. You're never actually going to make anything. You're never going to do anything that's new and novel. And you will become part of the sort of transhumanist machine that Klaus Schwab was talking about. You will become that useless eater. That's why it's so important to have a hobby, for example, something as simple as that. It's the most basic.
But the thing is, Jerm, you just never know. You never know what, right? We're all taught that, we can be one of two things. We can either be the absolute narcissist and have the likes of, some of these big music producers behind us, Simon Cowell, whoever it is, that turns us into some kind of cultural megastar, and it's all fake. Ordinary people that have a creative mind or a creative inspiration, you just never know who is going to do something which is going to actually inspire other people, and so we should not, while we should not ever be aiming at this level of narcissism that we're seeing at promoted in front of us on television and on YouTube and so on, we should also not be afraid just to express ourselves, because something might just trigger something in somebody else, which might start something. You just never know. So that is why we should, all of us should be doing something which is creative in and of itself, without the intention of ever perhaps making any major impact on the world, but you just never know. It could be anybody that does that at the end of the day.
You're also alluding to something really important, and I said this to Charles last week. Self-censorship is a wonderful way to damage creativity. And self-censorship is a result of being scared of hurting somebody's feelings, or being scared of what happens.
Well, it's also about being scared of having your own feelings hurt, because of course we do live in a toxic social media atmosphere, and so it is also. I'm not going to underestimate the bravery that it takes to actually put yourself out there, because it can be very, very unpleasant sometimes, and so people do have to recognize that got to be somewhat thicker skinned than maybe they might otherwise have needed to be at some point in the past.
That's a really good point, actually. Being thick skinned, because creativity comes with that, because you're making yourself vulnerable. Excuse me. You're making yourself vulnerable when you make something. For example, if you make a song, if you write a song, or you paint something, or you even put yourself in front of the camera like on UK column, you're making yourself vulnerable.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I think it depends why you are creating something in the first place. And I think this goes back to the encroachment of narcissism into people's lives. I mean, deliberately so. That's exactly what those television programs are about. The sort of the love of self rather than the love of creativity. And so, if you paint something, I mean, crikey, I draw and dabble a bit in watercolors and whatnot. I don't think I've ever shown one to anyone. I mean, why would I do that?
And you play bagpipes.
Yeah, righto. Pipe down. But the point is, this is the whole thread of this discussion really is that it does the mind, body, and soul good to create. I mean, that is absolutely demonstrable what you then do with that creation is sometimes up to you, sometimes up to other people. And the way I believe it should work is that in becoming aware of whatever it is that somebody else does do, whether it's the creation of poetry or prose or sculpture or painting or indeed knitting jumpers or whatever it is, if it's recognised, first of all, it has to be seen or heard or whatever, but if it's recognised that there is a skill there that other people would like to receive the benefit of, then they can encourage that person to do more of it. And that's exactly, going back to when Brian started producing the Devonport column 20 years ago, the reason UK column exists today is that people kept encouraging because they did think that creation was worthwhile and it was something that they were prepared to invest in. And the same should apply to everything. And I think that is a critical part to it, which is not at all to say that whenever you sit down to write something or draw something or sculpt something, you're thinking, I wonder where I could be in 10 years' time. I wonder who's going to decide that they want to pay millions of pounds for this. That's fundamentally the wrong place to start. You're doing it because, first of all, you get pleasure in doing it. You're wanting to develop whatever it is that you think you're creating or learning. I mean, okay, everyone's going to have slightly different motivations, but your storytelling, your recording, your documenting, there are a load of different motivations. I would say absolutely at the bottom of that list, / having dropped off the bottom of it, is sort of what you can get from it. But that's why I do make the distinction between what would be described as say, works of art and practical things. If you live on an island and you are the one person who has the skills to build boats or fishing nets or whatever, well, I mean, to sit on that and not teach anyone else or not to in any way project it would be, could be construed as selfish. There would be a benefit not just to you but to others from doing that. So I think there are lots of considerations with all of this, but as I say, where people are placed now is to consider primarily everything back to front. It's the sort of, how famous do I want to be? How much money do I want to try and have? And then reverse engineer it to what computer program is going to generate whatever music that such and such a generation is supposed to like. It's so cynical and it's just, it's diabolical, but tragic that sadly, statistics reflect the fact that the majority of people are not yet seeing through this. Why not?
Well, I mean, it also, if you think about it, right? So there's also a sense of community that happens here. I'll give you an example. So here on the farm that we live on, about 40 or 50 homes here, country estate. They had a local band that came and set up on this big patch of grass, and we all went down and put our blankets down, and the little coffee shop that's there brought us red wine and pizzas and whatever, and it was such a nice time because it brought everybody together. There's a sense of community that you otherwise don't get when you're on your phone, and it was just a lovely evening. And you go home after that and you feel there's a sense of meaning, that comes out of just something as simple as making music. It affects a whole lot of people. It doesn't just affect you, and they're not there to try and become famous. They're just there because it's a great evening, and so the positive benefits go well beyond just for themselves. It affects everybody else around them, and that I find so sad is being lost in the attention economy that's going on around us.
The only way to solve that is to remember how it used to be, and of course, the possibility that people will remember how it used to be is why we are bombarded with this idea that nostalgia is a bad thing, and this has been something that's been promoted, that nostalgia is a bad thing for the last 5-6 years in particular. Nostalgia became a word that was being bandied about by many think tanks and mainstream press, that we don't want to be looking back at how things, we want to be staring at our smartphones the whole time. We have to remember a little bit of what we how things used to be, and maybe think that is something we might want to recreate in some way, and even that would be a creative.
Yeah,
act.
not let go.
The core thing is to switch the damn phone off.
Yeah, I mean, but progress isn't always a good thing.
No, I think the direction of travel at the moment, the progress that we are on at this point in time, as families, as societies, is extremely negative. And but you know, again, it comes down to this old question of are we prepared to be to have our course in life charted for us by others, or are we going to take control of that to some degree, whether that's as individuals or as a family group or as something slightly larger than that.
I was having a conversation. I'm so sorry. Sorry, I thought you'd finished.
No, go ahead.
I was having a conversation with my cousin. He's an incredibly talented musician, knows a lot of musical theory, but he himself is a very good musician. And we were actually discussing AI music, and he outright says it's not real. It's just not real. Even if it sounds like music, has a beat, everything, it goes against the very grain of what it means to create something. It's basically an amalgamation of everything else that exists, and that's been put together through an algorithm. And he says he rejects it outright as a result. And I think that's an attitude that perhaps is healthy. We need to also search for what is real. And I think that's going to be quite hard. I mean, I'm thinking of my child. You know, what's it going to look like 20 years from now? It's pretty scary.
Yeah, Charles.
No, I'm sorry. That was just a note of agreement. I think it is, and I think people should. What's the point in saying this to an audience who are minded to listen to this in the first place? But I would hope that people do buck up and realise, because I think the point that that should be made, that I think we have made, is that this is related to so many other things. And if you lose creativity in the most general sense, then all the benefits that society is supposed to reap from coalescing and forming units of some sort of togetherness are lost, because people cannot work out how to do all the sorts of things that they have achieved over the ages, and we appear to be in a decline. So to the point about progress, I think progress is a very sneakily used word because it implies positive change. I think that is not at all the way that things are changing. And there are, I would say, infinite examples of something changing, but there not being any improvement, but it's described as being progress. Sorry, Mike, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it'd be worth just commenting on why AI music is not real. And Charles sort of alluded to this earlier on when he was talking about Renaissance art, for example, that there were messages in that, there was an intent in that piece of art. And even if you look at classical music, it doesn't matter. In fact, it doesn't matter what the genre is. There's intent in what has been produced. Whereas the best that AI can do is it can, to some degree, understand the rules of music. It can be trained to understand what humans created in the past that became popular or that is considered good, and it can just use mathematics to produce something which in some way replicates some aspects of. But it's not. There's no creative act in it. There's no intent in it. There's no message, and so therefore it is an empty shell. And so I absolutely get what your friend was saying about that. We should absolutely be rejecting anything that AI produces that claims to be in some way cultural, because there's nothing real, there's nothing human, there's nothing creative in it.
Yeah, he was saying to me also that, I mean, he saw the Statue of David. Where is it now? It's in Italy somewhere, isn't it? No.
It's Florence.
Yes.
Florence, yeah.
That's right. And he said he stood in front of it and he got emotional because he realized right there that a guy actually, with his own hands, created that. Sure, there was intent and there was a budget, etc., but he still created it. And my wife and I went to Versailles a few years ago, and I stood under those ceilings and I looked at that art, and it was just majestic. Without going into any of the politics of the time, just experiencing that art is something on a level that's.
You've just hit the nail on the head. It has to be experienced.
Yes,
and it can't be experienced on a screen. Right? It has to be experienced. That is part of the process. That's part of the creative process, is to experience art, because in that experience you learn, and then you get inspiration for expressing yourself in other ways.
And you cannot replicate that. Yeah, you cannot replicate that with an algorithm. Okay, so
the other point. Well, actually, I did talk about this a little bit last week in reference to Camille Paglia's assertions about the decline of a particular civilization and how that's reflected in its art. But of course, the other point to make about not just Versailles, but the Michelangelo's David is, of course, what David himself looked like, which was like a man should look, and you don't get many of them around these days. Which I don't. That's not it. Well, that I don't say that. And by the way, I'm not saying you don't get too many naked men walking around the place. I'm talking about people who are actually in the right shape. And this is always a tricky subject. People don't like to talk about it. But crikey, if we've progressed from there to what we are now, I'm afraid to say I absolutely throw progress back in whoever's face that's come from. It's just nonsense. We haven't progressed. That is not the case. It's very easy to demonstrate that with exactly what you say, by looking at not just the incredible craftsmanship that was involved in creating a statue like David, but also looking at David himself. And then again, exactly the same with Versailles. I know we are, in talking about those things like that, we are putting to one side the other influences that are there, and so I do sort of insert that caveat. But nonetheless, I mean, crikey, really progress from there? Yeah, right.
Look, this is a very abstract conversation, and I think we've done well to stretch it out into an hour. But I mean, I think the moral of the story is actually the importance of making stuff and not forgetting that if you just outsource everything, you lose the ability to be creative. And I think by extension, you lose what it means to actually be human. And you fall prey to the agenda that Klaus Schwab was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've got to participate. We've got to actually participate in life and not just sit there like a vegetable on a sofa consuming. This has to be absolutely rejected.
Absolutely. Now, where are we on sampling pieces of music to splice into this podcast? Is that something we're allowed to do?
It depends on the copyright issues.
That's a shame. All right. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a song. See, this is why I say get it in, because I can't remember the name of it. But there is a song that's been running through my head that refers to exactly this, which is about a young girl.
Charles?
Because I can't remember the words. That's the problem. I can't remember nearly enough of it But it is good, and but it's the whole point of it is it's creating for the sake of creating. It's art for the sake of art. It's drawing for the sake of drawing. Anyone who knows it, I think it's by Alex somebody, and it references a young girl in the East Riding of Yorkshire, and I can't remember any more than that. It's really annoying me. So, so if somebody's creative juices are fired by that, then do tell me what it is, and then put the link somewhere, and people can listen to it, because I think it's great. It fits very well with what we've been talking about.
That just reminds me quickly, this is not related at all, but Peter Sellers told a great story about a song that somebody wanted him to sing, because he also played in a band. He played the kettle drum. And he said it was, go and find it on YouTube. It's extremely funny. He tells the story of how this guy was trying to get them to play a song, and he couldn't remember the name. So anyway, it's worth listening to. Okay. Mike and Charles, I appreciate the conversation. Catch up with you next week.